Cars rarely fail all at once. Most expensive repairs build quietly. Moisture sitting where it shouldn't. Friction slowly increasing. Parts moving just a little harder than before. Nothing feels urgent, so it gets ignored. Weeks turn into months, and when something finally breaks, it feels sudden even though the damage was already there. This isn't about miracle fixes or shortcuts. It's about understanding how small, everyday neglect turns into costly repairs, and where a product like WD-40 can help in specific situations, not solve everything. According to the American Automobile Association, nearly 1/3 of roadside breakdowns could be prevented with proper maintenance. If protecting your car before problems show up matters to you, consider subscribing before we continue. What WD-40 really is, and why people misuse it. WD-40 was created for one specific purpose: to push water away from metal. It isn't grease, it isn't a long-term lubricant, and it isn't meant to repair worn parts. When sprayed, it seeps into tight areas, displaces moisture, and briefly reduces friction. That short period of effectiveness is where its value lies, and where misunderstandings usually start. Problems appear when WD-40 is treated as a solution instead of a temporary buffer. Repeated spraying on parts that require grease, seals that need conditioning, or components already worn out doesn't restore them. In many cases, it removes what little protection remains and allows wear to continue faster. The product does its job early, then quietly steps out of the picture. Used properly, WD-40 restores control to the situation. It creates a pause. It gives metal time to move without being forced, and prevents moisture from staying where it causes harm. That pause often determines whether a part comes free cleanly or fails under pressure. The real advantage isn't using more, it's knowing when to use it, and just as importantly, when to stop. Treating WD-40 as short-term support rather than a fix keeps small problems manageable and prevents minor issues from becoming expensive mistakes. When metal stops moving before it actually breaks, metal parts almost never fail without warning. Before something snaps or shears, it begins to resist. Movement feels tighter than it should. Threads no longer turn smoothly. A part that once moved easily suddenly feels stubborn. That resistance isn't random. It usually comes from corrosion forming between contact surfaces where moisture and time have quietly taken hold. The real damage starts when force replaces patience. A seized fastener doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because pressure is applied to metal that's already stressed. Threads strip, bolt heads round off. What should have been a simple removal turns into drilling, extraction, or replacement. The cost increases not because the part was bad, but because the response was rushed. This is where WD-40 works best, when it's used calmly. It penetrates tight spaces and helps loosen corrosion gradually. That process takes a little time, but it reduces resistance instead of fighting it. During that pause, metal relaxes instead of tearing itself apart. The difference is significant. Parts come free cleanly instead of breaking. Threads stay intact. Options remain open. That short wait often prevents hours of repair later. Time spent waiting costs nothing. Replacing damaged components costs much more. The moisture problem. You can't see yet. Moisture rarely shows itself clearly. It doesn't always drip or leave obvious marks. Instead, it settles quietly into seams, threads, joints, and contact points where air circulation is limited. These are the places that stay damp the longest and dry the slowest. That's where oxidation begins. Early oxidation doesn't look like rust. There's no flaking, no discoloration, and no visual warning. Metal can appear perfectly fine while its surface is already changing at a microscopic level. As moisture reacts with bare metal, strength slowly decreases. By the time rust becomes visible, the process has already been working for a long time. WD-40 helps interrupt this process by displacing moisture and creating a short-lived barrier against continued exposure. It doesn't seal metal permanently or stop oxidation forever, but it prevents moisture from staying in place long enough to gain traction. That early interruption matters more than most people realize. Used correctly, this temporary protection slows damage and buys time for proper maintenance. It helps prevent small hidden issues from building quietly until they demand expensive repairs. Used incorrectly or relied on too heavily, it can give a false sense of security. The value comes from timing, not repetition. Catching moisture early changes outcomes. It keeps oxidation from gaining momentum and turns what could have become a sudden repair into something controlled and manageable. The panic moments that make damage worse. Panic is one of the most expensive forces in car care. When something won't move and time feels tight, urgency takes over. Hands push harder, tools get forced. What started as mild resistance quickly turns into broken parts. Most failures don't happen because a component was beyond saving. They happen because pressure replaced patience. Breakdowns and surprises amplify this effect. Stress narrows judgment. The goal shifts from understanding the problem to making it move right now. That's when threads strip, fasteners snap, and hinges twist out of alignment. The original issue may have been small, but the reaction turns it into something far more costly. WD-40 is most effective in these moments when it's used to slow everything down. A controlled spray followed by waiting allows it to work into tight spaces and loosen friction gradually. During that pause, pressure stays low. Metal has time to relax. Corrosion breaks its grip instead of being torn apart. The product isn't fixing the problem. It's creating space for a safer outcome. That pause changes results more than people realize. Threads stay intact. Hinges remain straight. Fasteners come free instead of breaking. What feels like lost time often prevents hours of repair later. Forcing parts may feel decisive, but it usually leads to regret. Slowing down isn't hesitation, it's control. Using WD-40 correctly in panic moments helps shift reactions from force to patience. That shift protects components, preserves options, and keeps minor problems from turning into irreversible damage. Where corrosion starts long before rust appears, corrosion almost never begins in plain sight. It starts quietly where panels overlap, where fasteners touch bare metal, and where water collects but never fully dries. Paint hides it, trim conceals it. From the outside, everything looks solid. Underneath, conditions are slowly changing. These hidden areas are vulnerable because moisture lingers longer than expected. Water seeps into seams, sits behind trim, and settles around bolts and joints. With limited airflow, metal stays damp just long enough for oxidation to begin. At this stage, there's no flaking, no discoloration, and no obvious warning. The structure weakens silently, while everything still appears normal. Once corrosion spreads beyond these early zones, repairs become far more involved. What could have been prevented with simple protection turns into sanding, replacement, or structural repair. The cost rises quickly because access is difficult, and damage has already progressed. WD-40 plays a limited but useful role here. A light, targeted application along exposed seams, contact points, or bare metal edges helps displace moisture and slow oxidation. This isn't permanent protection, and it isn't a substitute for proper coatings or repair. It's a short-term defense that buys time and prevents early corrosion from gaining momentum. The mistake is ignoring these areas entirely because nothing looks wrong. By the time rust becomes visible, the opportunity for easy prevention has passed. Paying attention to where corrosion begins, not where it ends, keeps maintenance simple and costs controlled. Noises that trigger unnecessary repairs. Noises create urgency. A squeak, creak, or brief squeal instantly suggests something is wrong, even when nothing has failed. Sound feels dramatic, so the mind jumps to replacement before understanding the cause. In many cases, those noises come from moisture, fine debris, or mild friction, not broken parts. This is where misinterpretation becomes expensive. Replacing components based on sound alone often leads to unnecessary work. Parts get swapped even though they're structurally fine. The real issue was friction, where movement should have been smooth, or moisture sitting where it shouldn't have been. WD-40 can be useful as a short-term diagnostic tool in these situations. A light application can temporarily quiet a noise by reducing friction or displacing moisture. If the sound stops briefly, it provides information. It suggests the part isn't failing, it's reacting. That distinction helps prevent panic-driven decisions and keeps money from being spent too soon. The important part is what comes next. Silence doesn't equal resolution. WD-40 is not meant to be the final step for noise-related issues. It helps narrow the cause, not erase it. Continued reliance without addressing the underlying need, proper lubrication, adjustment, or cleaning allows wear to continue quietly. Restraint protects judgment. One controlled application can clarify what you're dealing with. Repeated spraying replaces understanding with habit. Used carefully, WD-40 helps drivers pause, evaluate, and choose the right response instead of reacting emotionally to sound. That pause often prevents replacements that were never necessary in the first place. Cosmetic damage that quietly becomes permanent? Contamination rarely stays superficial. Bug residue, tree sap, road tar, and transferred paint don't just rest on a surface, they bond to it. Heat, sunlight, and time cause those substances to harden and interact with protective coatings. What starts as a minor blemish slowly becomes something far harder to remove without causing damage. The risk isn't cosmetic alone. As contaminants sit, they weaken clear coats and finishes underneath. Moisture gets trapped, edges lift, protective layers lose integrity. By the time discoloration or texture changes appear, correction often requires polishing or refinishing instead of simple cleaning. Used carefully, WD-40 can interrupt this process. A light, brief application helps loosen stubborn contaminants without scraping or harsh abrasives. It works by breaking the bond holding foreign material to the surface, allowing removal with minimal pressure. This isn't restoration, and it isn't meant to create lasting protection. It's early intervention meant to stop damage from settling in. Timing is everything. The longer contaminants remain, the more aggressive the correction must be. What could have been wiped away easily becomes a job that risks dulling finishes or thinning protective layers. Early removal preserves surfaces and keeps costs low. Restraint matters here as well. Excess product or repeated use leaves residue and creates new problems. WD-40 should be used once, deliberately, and followed by proper cleaning. Treated this way, it buys time and protects finishes. Treated casually, it replaces care with confidence and leads to avoidable damage. In cosmetic care, delay is expensive. Acting early keeps small surface issues from turning into permanent scars. The areas people never maintain until it's too late. Some components work every single day without ever being checked. Hinges, latches, sliding points, and contact surfaces move repeatedly, yet they're rarely part of routine maintenance. As long as they function, they're ignored. The problem is that movement without protection slowly increases friction, and friction always leads to wear. This wear doesn't feel dramatic at first. Parts still open, close, and release. They just do it a little less smoothly. Moisture settles in. Dirt works its way between surfaces. Over time, dry movement grinds material away and creates resistance that didn't exist before. By the time something finally stops working, damage has already progressed beyond a simple fix. WD-40 helps in these situations by temporarily restoring smooth movement and pushing moisture out of tight spaces. That temporary relief reduces stress on parts and prevents people from forcing them when resistance appears. It doesn't solve the underlying need for proper lubrication or adjustment, but it creates a window to address those needs on your terms instead of during an emergency. The key is awareness, not frequency. Constant spraying creates more problems than it solves. What matters is recognizing which areas quietly wear out and responding early, with restraint. A single, well-timed application is often enough to prevent escalation. Preventive care doesn't require complicated routines. It requires paying attention to how things feel before they fail. Knowing which parts deserve occasional attention keeps maintenance controlled, predictable, and far less expensive than waiting until something suddenly refuses to move. Short-term protection versus long-term solutions. This is where expectations matter. WD-40 is not a permanent repair. It doesn't replace grease, parts, or proper service. It creates breathing room. Used correctly, it helps you avoid damage while decisions are made calmly. Used excessively, it causes problems of its own. Knowing when to stop matters as much as knowing when to start. If this perspective is already helping you think differently about car care, consider subscribing. This channel focuses on preventing mistakes before they turn into bills, without hype, shortcuts, or panic. Cold weather and situations that multiply damage. Cold weather doesn't create new problems. It exposes the ones that have been quietly developing. As temperatures drop, metal contracts slightly, clearances tighten, and residues thicken. Parts that moved without resistance in warmer conditions begin to hesitate. That hesitation is often the first warning sign, even though it feels minor at the time. Moisture makes this worse. Seasonal changes cause condensation to form inside joints, latches, hinges, and contact points that rarely dry completely. Road spray adds salt, grit, and grime that settle into hidden areas and stay there. These conditions don't cause immediate failure, they accelerate slow corrosion and wear, working silently beneath the surface until something suddenly refuses to move or breaks under pressure. This is where judgment matters more than force. In cold or wet conditions, applying pressure to resistant parts increases the risk of damage. WD-40 helps in these moments by displacing moisture and easing friction just long enough to restore controlled movement. It acts as a short-term defense against harsh conditions, not a cure for underlying wear. Used thoughtfully, it reduces stress on parts during weather transitions and helps prevent small seasonal issues from turning into emergency repairs. It doesn't replace proper maintenance or eliminate long-term needs, but it lowers the chances of being caught off guard when conditions shift suddenly. Seasonal awareness changes outcomes. Recognizing when weather multiplies risk encourages patience instead of force. That awareness prevents repairs that feel sudden, even though the damage has been building quietly over months. Appearance problems that signal deeper neglect. Not every visual flaw is harmless. Some are purely cosmetic, but others are early warnings that protective layers are failing. Dull paint, sticky residue, and cloudy surfaces often get blamed on age, when the real cause is exposure that hasn't been addressed. When these signs are ignored, damage doesn't stay on the surface. It settles into layers that are far more expensive to correct later. Appearance starts to matter the moment it reflects vulnerability. Contaminants that sit too long don't just look bad, they interact with clear coats, seals, and protective finishes. Heat bakes them in, sunlight breaks barriers down, moisture gets trapped underneath. Once that protection weakens, wear accelerates quietly, even if nothing looks urgent from a distance. That's how small cosmetic issues cross the line into functional damage. Used carefully, WD-40 can help interrupt that process. A light, controlled application can loosen stubborn residue and lift contaminants that would otherwise require scraping or harsh chemicals. This is temporary support, not repair, and not restoration. The goal is to stop ongoing exposure, not create a shine that hides deeper issues. Limits matter here. Repeated use or heavy application creates new problems by leaving residue that attracts dust and interferes with proper finishes. WD-40 works best as a single, deliberate step, a way to reset conditions before proper cleaning, polishing, or protection takes over. Used once correctly, it prevents further bonding and buys time. Used carelessly, it replaces attention with false confidence. The takeaway is simple. When appearance starts changing, it's worth asking why. Addressing exposure early keeps surface issues from turning into permanent damage, and avoids costs that feel unnecessary only because the warning signs were overlooked. Tools and parts that fail when you need them most. Emergency equipment rarely fails because it was worn out. It fails because it sat untouched for too long. Tools kept in trunks, under seats, or inside compartments are exposed to constant temperature changes. Warm air cools overnight. Moisture forms. Over time, that condensation settles on metal surfaces, where it slowly begins to do damage. This process is easy to overlook because nothing appears wrong at first. Hinges still move, cables still bend, connections still look intact. But oxidation doesn't need motion to progress. It builds quietly in still air, especially in enclosed spaces where humidity has nowhere to escape. By the time those tools are needed, resistance shows up where it never existed before. A jack won't turn smoothly. A lug wrench feels stiff. A latch refuses to move. Storage conditions matter far more than people realize. The trunk is not a dry, stable environment. It experiences heat, cold, vibration, and moisture cycles year after year. Those conditions create the perfect environment for corrosion, even on equipment that has never been used. This is where WD-40 plays a limited but useful role. A light application before long-term storage helps push moisture away from exposed metal and slows oxidation during periods of inactivity. It's not about keeping tools coated or reapplying often. It's about preparing them once, intentionally, so they respond properly later. Quiet preparation prevents loud failure. When an emergency arrives, that equipment needs to work immediately without force or frustration. Taking a few minutes ahead of time avoids the stress of finding out something seized at the worst possible moment. When using WD-40 actually makes things worse. This is where honesty matters most. WD-40 isn't harmful by nature. but it can cause problems when it's used in the wrong places or used too often. Rubber components can dry out. Parts that depend on grease for long-term protection can lose that layer. In those cases, what feels like maintenance quietly removes the protection the part actually needs. The damage doesn't show up right away. At first, everything seems better. Movement improves, noise fades, resistance drops. But underneath, parts may now be operating outside their intended conditions. Without proper lubrication or protection, wear accelerates, dirt clings to excess residue, moisture returns. What started as a quick spray slowly becomes a reason parts fail sooner than expected. Repeated use is where false confidence sets in. Each application feels like action, so real maintenance gets delayed. Instead of addressing seals, bushings, or proper lubricants, problems are temporarily silenced and allowed to grow. By the time symptoms return, damage has often progressed further than it would have if nothing had been sprayed at all. Restraint is what separates helpful use from harmful use. Knowing where WD-40 does not belong is just as important as knowing where it helps. It isn't meant for rubber conditioning. It isn't a substitute for grease. It isn't designed for constant reapplication. Its value comes from being targeted and brief. The goal isn't frequent spraying. The goal is controlled support. Use it to displace moisture, reduce friction long enough to avoid forcing something, or protect bare metal temporarily. Then stop. Stopping at the right time preserves parts, prevents buildup, and avoids creating the very problems people are trying to solve. The real secret: judgment beats any product. No product replaces judgment. Experience isn't about collecting more sprays, tools, or tricks. It's about noticing patterns early. The slight increase in resistance, the way moisture keeps returning to the same spots, the moment something stops moving as freely as it should. Those signals appear long before parts fail. They're easy to miss, especially when nothing feels urgent. WD-40 works best when it supports that awareness. It helps reduce friction, displace moisture, and create a temporary buffer while you decide what actually needs attention. Problems begin when it's treated as a solution instead of support. Spraying without thinking feels productive, but it often hides the real issue just long enough for damage to continue building underneath. Used with restraint, WD-40 becomes part of a bigger process. You spray, you pause, you reassess. You don't force parts to move just because they can. You don't keep reapplying because something went quiet for a moment. You recognize that silence doesn't always mean resolution. It sometimes just means time was bought. Experienced drivers develop this instinct naturally. They know when resistance means stop, not push. They understand that moisture doesn't need to look dramatic to cause harm. They treat temporary help as exactly that. Temporary. That mindset protects threads, seals, contact points, and finishes without relying on shortcuts. The real advantage isn't knowing more hacks. It's knowing when to step back and let patience do the work. That awareness prevents stripped parts, avoids unnecessary replacements, and turns small moments of caution into long-term savings. Judgment, applied consistently, saves more money than any product ever will. Final thought. Preventing repairs feels boring until it matters. Preventive care rarely feels rewarding in the moment. Nothing breaks, nothing rattles, no warning lights appear. Everything just keeps working. That quiet is often mistaken for nothing to do, when it's actually proof that small decisions are doing their job. The most expensive repairs don't arrive loudly. They show up later, after months of moisture sitting where it shouldn't, friction increasing little by little, or parts being forced when patience would have avoided damage. Flashy fixes get attention because something already failed. Calm habits prevent that moment entirely. Slowing down when resistance appears, protecting exposed areas from moisture, and knowing when to stop before pressure causes harm are the habits that quietly protect your car and your wallet. They aren't dramatic, but they're effective. WD-40 fits into that mindset when it's treated correctly. Not as a cure-all, but as support. A way to reduce risk, buy time, and prevent small issues from turning into regret. Used with judgment, it helps you stay ahead. Used carelessly, it creates the very problems people are trying to avoid. If learning how to avoid unnecessary repairs, stress, and surprise bills is useful to you, consider subscribing. The goal is avoiding unnecessary repairs by recognizing issues before they grow.